The much-anticipated Russian offensive that began in late winter has effectively stopped after failing to pretty much do anything of significance. Whilst obviously this doesn't mean the fighting has stopped, it just means that there will be no sweeping attacks with large formations that gobbles up vast quantities of land. Russian forces are still banging away at Ukrainian lines across the Eastern Front, but it lacks the intensity of the assault. Rather, the whole affair has fallen back into the Russian playbook of slow mincing movement. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley said Russian forces have not made any progress in the past 20 days. The Russians are struggling in a big way, Milley told a House Armed Services Committee hearing on Wednesday. These forces are very undertrained, they are essentially doing frontal assaults into machine gun positions, and they are getting slaughtered. That's also true across the entire front line, from Kreminna all the way down to Kherson, the top U.S. general continued. The Ukrainians have fought a remarkable defensive fight and the Russians have not achieved their strategic objectives. With advanced Western armor arriving, Ukrainian forces have spoken of the much-anticipated counter-offensive. Colonel General Oleksandr Syrsky, the commander of Ukraine's ground forces, said in a telegram post last week the Russians have lost considerable strength during the offensive. Very soon we will take advantage of this opportunity, as we once did near Kiev, Kharkiv, Balaklia and Kupiansk, Syrsky said, referring to successful Ukrainian counteroffensives last year. This counteroffensive will have to be one that avoids the meat grinder like attritional fighting that the Russians prefer and instead be one that circumvents this in favor of maneuver warfare. This is where the Western weapons come to the party, the fast-moving Bradleys being able to sniff out a weakness in a defensive line, through their active reconnaissance role, like bloodhounds sniffing for the fox. This allows the Leopards, Challengers, supported by troop-carrying mortars to burst through, taking the whole defensive line in the flank and rolling it up or alternatively swinging out deeper and catching the Russians in a large pocket. Think the German army in 1941, and the massive pincers created by the panzer forces. The Russians are weak now and their transport capability is highly questionable. Throw a net and you will be surprised what you capture. The Russians and their bots keep calling Ukrainians Nazis. Perhaps it's time to take a leaf out of the blitzkrieg. God knows the time has arrived. So swift, sharp attacks of maneuver will be critical to success, because whilst the Russian offensive may be over, Moscow still has far more manpower than Ukraine and this gives them the edge in a battle of attrition. A partial Russian mobilization last year called up some 300,000 reservists. Putin also signed a decree on Thursday authorizing a conscription of 147,000 new conscripts between April and mid-July, although the service members are likely to undergo training and it's unclear if and when they will be deployed to the front line. Although previous experience is that it will be quick, with training being in country and often handled by the Ukrainians shooting at them. We have covered the prospect of a second mobilization and frankly I am astounded that Putin hasn't done this already. The only possible reason is that the Russian economy is in freefall, and he simply cannot afford it both in terms of actual money and the complete lack of effective equipment. Mark my words, running a war like Putin is doing, by also running a pseudo-type democracy at the same time, is impossible. He will need to start cracking down and accept that he is a dictator and that desperate times require desperate measures. These measures would be general mobilization, giving the FSB further power, nationalizing industry and completely stamping out dissent. Then he needs to ramp up his propaganda and politicize his army. Nationalizing Wagner would also be a good idea, so that they start to operate within the Russian command and control structure and cohesion improves. Then and only then, will he have what he needs to continue his war of attrition. Before you say anything, it has already been happening, but it will speed up as the bad news continues. Bakhmut is a brilliant example of Russian attritional warfare. Yes, they have incurred massive casualties, but these are mercenaries, so Putin cares even less and so is more than happy to keep mincing them. Imagine if the whole army was like that. This war would continue until Ukraine simply ran out of men. The only positive for Russia on this front is that the brave Ukrainian defenders have also been butchered. That being said, I truly believe that this city will serve as the pivot point for the Ukrainian counteroffensive. By holding and draining Russian manpower as much as possible, they give this attack the best chance of success. Ukraine needs to transition the battle out of a defensive position with a strategic maneuver, said George Beebe, the director of Grand Strategy at the Quincy Institute for Statecraft. If you're looking at this as a war of attrition, where the Russians are not actually focusing on big arrow movements on the map, but on grinding down Ukraine's ability to bring manpower and munitions to the battle, Beebe said, then I think you get a different picture, and the Russians may have more reason for optimism. I agree with him on this point but not on the next one. He also questioned whether Ukrainian troops have the capability to break through fortified Russian defenses, even with Western armor, saying Ukraine needs hundreds of those to make a difference. On this point he is wrong. He hasn't considered just how poor things are for the Russians. If the armor is used correctly and in groups, I only see success. He sees this as being a long-term war with no end in sight. Once again, I disagree. Russia needs to be routed so that there is homegrown regime change and there is ever-growing opposition to Putin for that to happen. Whilst Russia generally likes to avoid worrying about casualties, even they live in the real world where families mourn losses and anger amongst its people grows, and boy have they been losing men. Ian Stubbs, a senior military advisor at the United Kingdom's Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, estimated about 30,000 Russian troops and soldiers with the mercenary outfit Wagner Group have died or been wounded just in Bakhmut alone. The astounding levels of incompetence in Russia's military leadership that have eroded Russia's military reputation are clear for all to see, Stubbs said in a Wednesday speech. This was backed up by the recent dismissal of the general in charge of the Volodar debacle, where 2 crack brigades and 130 pieces of equipment were all but destroyed. Frankly, the Russian generals have shown themselves to be so poor, more of a shake-up is required. But once again Putin has loyalties to those helping him remain in power. Then you have constant bickering and backstabbing at the highest level, like Wagner Group founder Yevgeny Prigozhin repeatedly criticizing the Russian military for not supplying his troops with enough ammunition. This has resulted in him being largely sidelined. You also have the recent assassination of Russian military blogger goon Vladlen Tatarsky. This one is clearly not a Ukrainian attack, as they wouldn't waste their resources on such a figure. This is an insider beef that got out of hand. In an effort to move away from the Volodar situation, Moscow appears to have refocused its efforts on the town of Avdiivka, located about 50 miles south of Bakhmut. But the British Defense Ministry said in an intelligence update on Tuesday that Russia is pushing to encircle Avdiivka, but has failed to gain significant ground after suffering heavy armor losses, the famous 3rd Army Corps having its tank regiment smashed up properly. Based on all of this, the only way Russia wins militarily is if Putin cracks down at home and takes the mantle of dictator officially. He can thereby enforce the appearance of success. When the counteroffensive does come, I would hope for 2 pincers, one to break out into the southern Zaporizhia region around the occupied city of Melitopol and to thereby cut off a land bridge to Crimea, with the other heading to Mariupol. This would trap a large Russian force in the region, which could then be systematically broken down by non-assault forces bought in after the tanks. What remains to be seen is how long it will take for them to get the Western equipment into position. We get one crack at this and it better work. Slava Ukraini.